I'll talk about Webrecorder and high fidelity web archiving. And so basically cover some of the challenges and solutions with the Webrecorder approach. And so Zainab covered some of the traditional approaches to web archiving, which involved bulk crawling, sort of pioneered by Internet Archive, and kind of some of the processes involved there. And so some of the challenges there, of course, that that approach, while it focuses on quantity, may not necessarily get the quality, especially of modern websites. And one of the challenges, of course, is JavaScript, because traditional crawlers aren't able to capture JavaScript sites very well, and most sites today use a lot of JavaScript. And so what are the other options? And that's sort of where the Webrecorder project comes in. So Webrecorder was started in 2014. It became part of Rhizome from 2016 to 2019, thanks to support from the Mellon Foundation. Now it is, again, an independent project, and it focuses on open source tool development, specifically on capturing and replaying the web using the browser itself. And the focus with Webrecorder is quality over quantity. And so won't necessarily capture as much content as you might with a traditional crawler, but you may be able to capture it very well. And the idea is to make tools that are available to everyone, so that anyone who's using the web can also create archives of their own. And it previously included the host service Webrecorder.io that is now part of Rhizome, and it's basically the same infrastructure. And so what I'll show today is a few demos. And so how do you capture a website? And the idea with Webrecorder is that you can capture as you browse, and it captures all the network traffic, and it works pretty well for social media archiving. And so I'll demo this desktop app. So this is kind of an example of a custom tool that's built specifically for archiving. And so this desktop app is available for free on GitHub, and also through this link here. And so when I start a desktop app, it might look like this. And I can create a new collection. And so I've created one here. And for example, I will enter so I prepared some URLs here for SSM. So I will just go ahead and enter that URL into Recorder here. And what the Webrecorder desktop app is it's basically, it has an integrated Chrome browser. And what it does is, as it's loading the site, everything is being captured. And over here on the top, you can see the size counter. So this is how much has been archived so far on this page. And so as I loaded it, it's already up to 289. And then for example, if I click on additional pages, so you can see the size counter going up. And so by interacting and actually browsing as a regular user would, the archiving process is in a sense made transparent, although not entirely so, but it's entirely user driven. So for example, here I can go through this slideshow, and you can see that the size counter at the top is going up as additional resources are being loaded. And so through this, I can define exactly which pages to archive. And so I can, in this case, I'm sort of manually going through this, through the slideshow here. And you might also think that, well, this is great, but this might be a tedious process. And I'll show some approaches that we've developed that can alleviate that. But at the same time, it also allows the user to define exactly what they want to archive. So this is now I've gotten up to 21 megabytes, and in this case, when I click stop, I can see the pages that have been archived, and I can click back on them, and now I can see what this is the one page that I have archived. If I click on this again, I should expect it to work. And you can see that I can, again, this is sort of what we call high fidelity web archiving, where the page is reproduced as accurately as possible. Sort of the user should not be able to tell the difference between the live site and the archived site in this case, because it was archived directly through the browser. So another example, maybe I'll choose this site here, so I can create a new session, and I can enter this URL again in the desktop app, and you can see it loading, and you can see the size counter go up, so it's kind of reassuring that things are being archived as the site loads. And so already it's up to 7 megabytes here, and then let's say I want to archive social media, and so Webrecorder works pretty well with social media archiving. However, it takes the idea is that it's essentially capturing all of the network traffic exactly as it's being loaded. Mm-hmm. And say now I'm on Instagram and I want to archive all of these posts. Well, so I can go ahead and I can click on each one of them in order to archive them. Are there any other options? And what we've developed to address this is so challenges that this approach can be tedious. And what we can do is we have the system called Autopilot, which is basically a pre-made script that can run inside a web page, and it can automate interacting with the browser in such a way that in such a way that a user would normally. And so, for example, I would start that here, and as you can see, what it will do is it will click on each of the posts. And again, I'm running this at the same time as screen sharing, so it may be a little bit slow. And you can see that it's actually archiving in real time here. And it's going to sort of keep going through all of these posts. And again, it's a little bit tricky because, for example, we can see that, for example, my network may not be as fast right now, and so it might need to wait a little bit longer. And so with this approach, we can automate some of the tedious work of archiving, especially social media. The challenges, of course, is that as these sites change, we have to update the script that, for example, can scroll through Instagram, and they change frequently. But I did update it earlier this week, so it is working for the time being. And so I'll stop it here. So it's already gotten about 22 megabytes, 23 now. And so just of time, I'll stop here. And so that's the Webrecorder Autopilot system. And we have behaviors for a few different sites. We have behaviors for Twitter, Instagram, Facebook is always a challenge, YouTube, SlideShare, and Yahoo Groups. And again, the challenge, of course, is maintaining these behaviors, because once we create them, they may break at any time. And so Webrecorder also does have some crawling tools for developers, and that's the browser tricks crawling system. The idea, again, is to crawl entirely using the browsers, and there's a new version of this in development, and the idea is that this is sort of closer to traditional crawling, but again is using the browser and can capture things at high fidelity. And so I'll just, this is sort of a video from that I actually shared on Twitter before. So I will, so the idea here is that with browser tricks, you can actually enter a crawl, and this is sort of the older version, and let's see if it, see how well it loads, and very quickly you can start a crawl using the browser, and it will essentially create a high fidelity archive, and you can actually watch the crawl as it's happening using a browser. And so this is kind of also crawling Instagram. from about a year ago. So this is sort of the old Instagram interface. And so the crawler runs, and it also extracts text. And so you can create sort of a high fidelity but small scale archive, and it also goes through Twitter in this case of the Rhizome Twitter account. And then at the end, so I'll just skip to the end a bit, you can actually, so once the crawl is done, you can click on the kind of view of the archive pages and do some basic search results. Again, this is very much focusing on the call of a single site at a time, so it's not sort of addressing some of the issues that occur when you're crawling at scale. But again, if you want to crawl a single site, this is sort of one approach. And so that's browser tricks. A new version is coming soon that will allow developers to run crawls on the command line very, very easily. So now we come to the part of, okay, so you've created the web archive. How do you browse them? So one version, or one option, is to use the desktop app, as I've shown, which has its own replay mode for local access. And that allows you to view archives that are created using the desktop app on your computer. If you want to share archives with others, another approach is to run PyWB, which is sort of the Python Wayback Machine. That's part of Webrecorder. It's a full-featured Python application. It can be deployed on a server and then serve archives. But how can you share things, specifically what you've archived locally, with others more easily? And for that, one of the latest tools that Webrecorder has developed is called Replay Webpage, which is basically a standalone site that runs directly in the browser and can load archives using your browser. So the idea is that you can just choose a file and you can then load it directly in the browser. And so I'll show how that works. So I'll go into, so I've stopped this archive, and then I'll export this archive as a work file, which Zainab covered, and I'll also talk about briefly. And then I can go into Replay Webpage, and I can then choose this work file. And since it's in my computer, it should load pretty quickly. It's 51 megabytes, and I should be able to now see the pages that I've archived using Replay Webpage. And so here the source is my local file, but if I were to host that work file somewhere else, I can then send this link to anyone, and they can view it on their own. And so this is the Replay Webpage interface, so we can kind of go through the pages that were archived just a few moments earlier, including, for example, Instagram should also work. And so this is kind of the archive that I've just, oh, maybe not, maybe it thinks I'm not logged in. So there's always some issues related to login, and yeah, so but we can probably see some of the posts here. Oh, nope, maybe it won't work. Well, so this is Replay Webpage. And what else you could do with Replay Webpage is you could actually embed this whole view into other sites. And so one example of that is here, right on the webrecorder.net site. So I can actually embed an archive tweet inside another page. And the idea is to make it as easy as possible to embed web archives into other sites, sort of as simple as embedding a PDF or a video, for example. Here's another embed that, for example, shows a version of Twitter from about a year ago. This is the IEPC Twitter account, and it's sort of embedded in this page here, just using the Replay Webpage embed tag. And so this provides a way to really easily share web archives with anyone without requiring a whole lot of infrastructure. So here it's just loaded from S3 in this case. And so continuing on, so how are web archives stored? So the standard format, of course, is the work format, which the Webrecorder desktop app supports. Is also using it. Many national libraries and institutions all over the world are using the work format. The idea with work is that it stores sort of the raw network traffic. It doesn't have really any custom metadata, though you could sort of add it, but it's not really designed for that. And it's also not easily searchable without an external index. And to deal with some of these issues, Webrecorder is working on a new format called Waxy, which is sort of streamable web archives and stands for Web Archive Collection Zipped. And it's basically a zip file that contains work files in addition to other metadata. And the main advantage of this format is that it allows for random access to large collections. And for example, this allows for very quickly loading larger archives in the browser using Replay Webpage. So for example, here's another demo. This archive is actually a 17 gigabyte file. And I can actually, because it contains, I think 200 Vimeo videos, but I can reload it fairly quickly because it only loads the portions that are needed at a time. And this is sort of an interactive project that was published by Stanford University Press, and it contains many videos here. Another example is that you can embed, with the Waxy format and Replay Webpage, you can embed and quickly load all sorts of archives directly in any site. So here, for example, is a demo running in Glitch, and we have an archive of Twitter, and I can sort of do a full reload. So after it's loading, it's actually caching it in the browser, and it can play fairly quickly. So here's a tweet. Here's an example of a YouTube video that has also been archived using Webrecorder, and I think it's trying to skip an ad initially, and then after that, you can see that it's playing, and it's playing. If this were shown at full screen, the user would sort of see that this is as YouTube. And this is kind of the idea of high fidelity, is that the archived version should look as close as possible to the original. And again, this can all be deployed simply using HTML and cloud storage. And so the Waxy format kind of allows for very quickly loading these streaming videos on demand. And so again, where can archives be stored? There's also Google Drive integration, in addition to just regular file storage. So you could actually open web archives from Google Drive, also using Replay Webpage. You can store them on S3. You can store them on institutional repository systems. You can upload them to Conifer, which is sort of Rhizome's hosting service. So you could just take a work file and upload it there, and it will be hosted. And just to show the, if I have the Google Drive integration set up here, so for example, I can just very quickly click on a work file in Google Drive, and again, it will just load it in Replay Webpage. And that's kind of how the Google Drive integration works, but you have to install it separately in order for that to work. And so, again, I don't want to make it seem too easy that solved everything. There are sort of never-ending challenges, as Zeynep also mentioned. Web pages can be, again, these days, web pages are replaced by dynamic web applications. So there's always a challenge to be able to archive the dynamic content, which requires user interaction. It's always a moving target because new web technologies are introduced and we have to keep up with them. And actually, capture is hard, but replaying accurately is even harder for a variety of reasons. Zainab mentioned some of them, so I also wanted to briefly mention a few others, including that when we replay URLs, we're sometimes not even getting the same URL back. We're getting the browser is requesting a different URL when we're playing it back than it did when capturing. So here's kind of a very simple example of that, of a page that might have a timestamp. It might have one timestamp when capturing, and then when we replay it, it has a slightly different timestamp. And so in this case, this underscore equals component is different, but the rest of it is the same. And in order to play back this page, there needs to be a system to kind of fuzzy match these URLs and determine that these are actually the same. And that's sort of a lot of what the Webrecorder tools do on the back end is there's a whole rule system for figuring out how to match this URL to this URL, for example, in order to be able to play back the sites. Another example why replay is hard is adaptive video. So for example, many sites use adaptive streaming, -HLS are two technologies where a different fragment of the video is loaded based on the bandwidth. So normally when you load, for example, YouTube, it may load different chunks of video based on on what your bandwidth is. Of course, that's great for live viewing, and it's terrible for archiving because you want to always load the same chunks. And Webrecorder tools approach this by normalizing these formats and only loading one resolution at a time. And in some cases, such as YouTube, it could actually force the YouTube site to serve an MP4 instead of these chunk formats. And the way that this is done is by actually rewriting the site on both capture and replay. So what is loaded in Webrecorder desktop app, for example, while it looks exactly the same, it has some subtle rewriting that's applied to it in order to be able to capture some of these video sites. And kind of next steps for Webrecorder, there's a new version of desktop app coming out. There's also a Webrecorder browser extension that's being developed. And we're also working on new documentation and new crawling tools such as browser tricks. And with that, here's some links for all the sites that I mentioned. There's sort of the main Webrecorder.net site kind of links to all of these, but I also wanted to mention these. And could also reach Webrecorder at info@webrecorder.net. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sirhan. And thank you again for having me. And I'm really great to share this work with everyone.